Welcome to What a Word is Worth, a space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. This is your host, Marianela Medrano. I am the founder of Palabra Training Center, where words are given as medicine. Today, my guest is Laurie Amodeo, someone I found while doing research on people who are directing mindfulness to the BIPOC community. So Laurie was kind enough to say yes to a stranger, but I guess we are not stranger, as you will see as we progress, as this conversation progresses. She holds a master's of business administration and is a certified yoga teacher who has been practicing yoga and Buddhism since 2005. She's a student of Zen and Vajrayana traditions, and she also specializes in yoga nidra and Kundalini yoga. Laurie's approach to embodiment practices exactly and is trauma informed and focuses on uplifting people from marginalized communities. She is of a Haitian lineage, so that makes us sisters from the same island. And she is the founder of the BIPOC Meditation Collective, an engaged contemplative community for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Laurie has also worked in strategy and communications, and she is pursuing a master's of social work degree. And she's also a singer, lyricist, sound shaper, writer, dancer, herbalist, and a student of Sogetsu Ikebana, or what I call the Japanese flower poetics. So welcome, Laurie. Makes me so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Marianela. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm so happy to be here and be with your listeners and viewers and be in conversation today.
Yeah. And as you know, this space is intended to explore the power of words to heal. And I see you as a kindred spirit who is also using words in multiple ways through your singer, writing, teachings. I think of your song, Kindness is Contagious. And I see it as a good example of words that heal, and your voice too, by the way. So please share with us how this song was born and the process of writing it.
Thank you. Yes, this song, Kindness is Contagious, like all of my songs, really begin with settling into my body, settling into the space, and connecting with what needs to come through. And it's it can be a kind of an exhausting process because you're kind of
Mhm.
like mining from the heart and from the psyche. And in some ways, I wish my songwriting process was a little less precious than that because I would probably be more prolific. But it came around with this sense of actually with COVID and this
Mhm.
contagion and this idea of interdependence and how that has just really come up to the surface in a very real way for us um, through this pandemic. And it's one of these pieces where I'm like, I really hope we don't miss that,
Mhm.
this lesson, this teaching from nature, because it's there's so much there, and I feel us missing that. We notice how we just, we're not getting things as quickly as we wanted to, or this is out of stock or whatever, but it's like, but because we're in this interdependent way of being and
Mhm.
existing together and relating to each other, And so is kindness. Kindness
Mhm.
is an energy and a way of being that, um, I think in its deep form is not passive. I think there's also an issue with the term kindness too. It can be
Mhm.
passive or too polite or something like that. But I really think it comes from a heart place, and there's origins of the word of kin and family. So,
Mhm.
which we are all, family, I believe. And for better or worse, yes, family, as family is. Um, and so uh, I, yeah, I looked through, journals and sat and meditated and took breaks um, and wrote this song, and I'm happy it's in the world, and that
Yeah.
you've enjoyed it. And yeah, it feels it's a helpful process for me to um yeah, to process my contemplations and work them out in song and in lyric and in words. And sometimes it doesn't, show up in a recording necessarily, but to be in practice with the sound vibration and
Mhm.
um, the word vibration of the experience, can just be really that expressive piece can be really medicinal for me.
Yeah, and to others, someone who received the song, I can say that both, the lyrics and also your voice, you have a beautiful, soothing voice that goes so well with the theme. I like what you were saying about, we are one family, and of course, part of um, the work that is ahead of us is to reconcile with that idea, to bring it back. And what better vehicle than kindness? And kindness breeds compassion, right? And compassion leads to love. And that's the way, that is actually the way of the future, is that, and is the collective, right? That we can, and COVID was this reminder that we cannot make it out together alone, that we have to, if we're gonna make it out, it's gonna be together in so many ways. So yes, so thank you for writing the song and for putting it out there. And we both offer mindfulness directed to the BIPOC population, the Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And as I said before, I came across your name researching people who were doing or are doing similar work than I'm doing. So what inspired you to center your offering this way? I'm imagining is along the lines of what you were saying, but I want to hear your, the reasons for why you created the collective.
Yes, yeah, thank you for asking. The collective came around based out of a personal need.
Mm,
I was a part of a meditation in a Buddhist community, and as you might be aware, many of them are do not center people of color and Black
mhm,
folks. And I really feel and have felt close to the teachings, and um, so I wasn't going anywhere within that respect. And the
mhm,
practice felt, it's really important to practice. And I was noticing that my energy felt, as I was practicing, I felt very different when I was practicing at home, or
mhm,
if I was practicing with, my couple friends who were also meditators, who are Black and people of color. And then when I was in these kind of white centered spaces, I would shrink.
mhm,
And it was just it's
mhm,
automatic, and
mhm,
it's a safety precaution, and there's so much going on there. And I said, well, if I'm going to keep doing this work, which is healing, and I want to take up as much space as I possibly can. And to be in community, to be in Sangha is part of the practice, part of the path. So I started looking around and I'm like, okay, like there's got to be other people. I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is pretty homogenous, but there are people of color here, and it was great to the BIPOC Meditation Collective started when we were, out and before pre-COVID. So to open that space and then to notice who was coming through, people who had lived here for years were saying, "Oh, I didn't know we were here." I didn't know there were so many people of color, and it's been wonderful to hold space and community for each other, and really with this intention of practicing together and taking up as much space as we need, and being in community with each other, and sharing space um, and sharing practice, and just being with each other, just a simple act of being. There's nothing for us to do necessarily, but we do process our experiences, and also explore other ways of meditating and other ways of contemplating as well, and contemplate different teachings um, from BIPOC teachers, which help, point us to our experience so that we can continue to be affirmed in our experience. I think my experience has been that receiving teachings from white teachers has been wonderful. And also when I receive teachings from Black and BIPOC teachers, there's a particular kind of resonance that that is just so impactful for me. And so it's wonderful to be able to share that in community, and have people meet other teachers and experience that also. And it helps us to tap more into our how we live and how we process the teachings, and affirm ourselves and affirm each other.
Yeah, and to have the space to share with other people who might have gone through similar experiences. I think it's or at least in my experience, is a unique gift. So yes, I feel the same way, that I'm grateful to the teachers who had led the way in this country, in both, white and BIPOC teachers, but that I always say, the roots of Buddhism are indigenous roots, and we can't forget that. So another part of the agenda of this podcast is to foster decolonizing practices, and the celebration of indigenous traditions. And I am interested in engaging with others in conversations on healing, both at the individual and collective levels. Conversations about how the marks of colonization, colonization is still alive and thriving, and the decolonizing work is very important. So one of my concerns is finding ways to hold anti-racial conversations that are coming from a place of humility and compassion. So what are your thoughts about this? Like, how do we have these conversations that are so necessary, but that we have it from a place of humility and compassion that is an expansive place in my experience, but it's not always accessible. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I so appreciate this contemplation. And the first thing that comes to mind is it has to happen in the body. I feel like we can intellectualize what's going on and the systems, and I'm studying social work, so I'm like, I'm in the systems and the politics and all of that, and that's really important because it's how people are affected in their day-to-day lives. But if we're going to have a cultural, a societal conversation about this, I think it really needs to live in the body, and we need to find ways to engage with what's happening internally, kind of dismantle the defenses that come up internally. And that might look like, affinity spaces before we can all speak together. I think that's,
Yeah.
why having BIPOC spaces for, going in and being vulnerable and being in practice are really important. And I hope that's, that's something that can be available to all affinities, however people, choose to identify. And then as we're doing the work, we can come together, so long as we feel like we can have these very embodied conversations where the mind is going to come in, it's going to do what it's going to do. But when we talk about decolonization or even colonization, there's so much that happens in the body. The what you're told and the rhetoric, it is so ingrained, and it becomes something I believe about myself, right? And then, as I'm doing this work, something will come up and I say, oh, is this mine? Is this for real? Or has this been passed down to me? And how does this show up in my world? And really being in experimentation, observation mode, of how personally, how I'm engaging with a colonization narrative or something like that that's coming up for me. So to really get to how it shows up in my body and how I'm showing up in the world, and that needs to happen on that collective level as well. So it's wonderful to know that we're having more of these conversations about decolonization, and I would like to see and hear more of what's happening in the body space. And I think we're getting there too, especially as we're talking more about trauma and such, which is 100%, I believe, part of the the kind of the cause and effect for thousands of years of colonization, and the way that's shown up in bodies and the epigenetics of that, and how we just perpetuate harm to each other, intentionally and unintentionally. So having more of that sense of what's happening in the body, I think gives us more agency for how to speak about that, and how to speak with each other and speak from a place that is experienced and that is lived, rather than what's happening in the head and what seems right and what feels right and what I can profit from, because then we're just perpetuating that part of colonization also.
Yes, and what I'm thinking is that there is a need, because as you pointed out, these things register at the cellular level, and sometimes we are in spaces, as you were saying before, where we shrink because we don't know how to be in those spaces, right? So the body gets painfully constricted, contracted, and part of the work is a cleansing work, in a way, by cleansing the energy in the body that we can so well do as as a yoga teacher, through movement and through grounding ourselves in the body, so we can action from there. So the idea of affinity groups, not just for us BIPOC people, but for everyone to be able to be in spaces with individuals who share similar experiences, and being able to process and to move the bodies in a way that can create space is part of the healing, and is part of the intent and the task at hand for all of us. And I'm so glad to know that there are people like you out there who have prepared in so many areas, to do this work, because it's not, this work is not a one angle thing. It's multi-layer, it's multifaceted, and we need to be attentive and preparing ourselves in many realms in order to be able to tackle and to create this sangha that should be like the human sangha eventually. But we do have to do that work in affinity groups. Yeah. So I think that's also the idea behind these, what constitutes spiritual activism, right? And so I will call what you are doing through the collective and through using yoga and your voice and your words, I call that engage, part of the engage spirituality. Do you agree with me?
I would, and I think it's taken me some time to let that be how I feel comfortable identifying with how I show up in this healing space, in this activist space. I think, there have been times where I feel like I have to be more in the street, or, I have, in that sense of activism, and I need to put my body more on the line. And I think in doing this work, and there's a lot of just kind of settling in and being honest with, like, what is it do I have to offer, and what feels resonant for me. And there was a time where I'm like, am I doing activism, and am I helping? Is this, is this enough? But it's genuine. It feels like it's coming. This is how I'm showing up. And so it's taken me some time to feel comfortable to admit that this is how I'm showing up, which is it's not as fiery as I think about when I think about the word activism. But there's more of like an earth and a water element there for me that shows up, and yet that's also needed. And so yes, I would say
that too belongs, right? Like everything belongs. And I think I was a kid. I grew up in the Dominican Republic. I was there until my, I've been here. I've been in this country longer than what I lived in the Dominican Republic, but my formative years happened there. And I mean, that's my soul. That country shaped me. And I, as a youngster there, I was someone who, despite coming from a very protective environment, I will go to the streets and I will go protesting. And someone was asking me about movement, and my first experience with movement, actually in another podcast, and I say my first experience with movement was running away from the police because I had gone to a manifestation without permission. I just said I was going to do homework with someone and just went to a protest. And so that was then. And I guess my point is that I did that when I had the energy, when I could roam the streets and do those things. But then it got to a point where I learned to still my body. And I learned to move a different energy that is equally powerful. And you know what got me into that actually was the writing of poetry, to denounce, poetry to dismantle, you know, the status quo. So I'm glad that you're willing to to own the engaged spirituality as a way of protesting and dismantling, because it is a valid one. And I guess it has, everything has its place and its time to be.
Yes, and this sense of I feel like the world and the society, part of what I envision, you know, I think it's also important for us to, and as part of the activism practice, is to
Mhm.
envision what is the world that we actually want to cultivate and live in.
Correct.
It's, you know, it's not enough to just point out what's wrong and to be
Mhm.
angry about it. I think that's very
Mhm.
important. But we
Mhm.
also, it's our responsibility to also vision together how we want things to look and feel, um, for ourselves and for each other and for our descendants. And pausing and being still is such a huge part of that. And I think
Mhm.
that part of what we are activating um, towards is, or even against, is this
Mhm.
sense of productivity and always being on and go and rushing and you know, profits and all of the, you know, there's so much movement that is distracting.
Noise, right?
There's
Like
so
there's
much
so much
noise. Yeah,
noise.
and I just, you know, I would love for us to just be, you know,
Mhm.
what kind of world would it be if people can truly be how they want to be and be engaged in phenomena and the environment,
Mhm. Mhm.
from on our own terms, and be
Mhm.
taken care of, you know, with the basic necessities which we are fully abundant with,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
um, but the way these systems have structured themselves shut people out of
Mhm.
what we have all a right to have access to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I'm thinking, I was fortunate to have found Thich Nhat Hanh very early in my life and in my career as a therapist. And I mean, he embodied this idea of action through stillness. You know, it sounds like a contradiction, but he proved that that wasn't a contradiction. And look at all the centers he was able to create around the world, and how he was able to move, you know, from trauma into generativity. I mean, it's like such an example from, you know, right there from your Zen tradition, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, so grateful to take that Han, and all of the, you know, the writings and the teachings that we have available to us now, and
Mhm.
recordings
Mhm.
from his life and his teachings and his sangha, for, you know, maintaining those and
Mhm.
spreading them. And yeah, that, you know, for someone like him to come from, you know, a war torn situation, and you could
Yeah.
easily have so much hatred and anger,
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
would imagine to some extent that was definitely there. But to
Mhm.
be in the practice of true compassion,
Mhm.
you know, and in the stillness that you're talking about, and there's so much power in that.
Mhm.
And when you encounter, you know, a brilliant being, a wisdom being like Thich Nhat Hanh, and it just shows us that that's possible.
Mhm.
You know, you know, if there's clearly a lot of discipline um, and heart and
Mhm.
just unwavering um, quality to the vision, that he had of and living in right action and right speech and all of that. And so it's important to have those examples, in our lives, and because it is possible to be engaged and also not to burn out, to be engaged, and to come from an embodied place. He didn't say a lot of words, It wasn't a lot of words, but the words that he spoke were just on point. And there's so much power and meaning in all of that. And
he had that ability, right, to say, as you just said, to say things so simply. Like in one of the talks for therapists, he said that something about anger makes me ugly. So who wants to be ugly, right?
yes, right? Yeah.
So let's not let's do something with that anger. Let's transform it into something else. It's that simple. And it is in the simplicity that the force resides. But in the introduction, I mentioned that you practice Ikebana, or the Japanese flower poetics, as I call it. And I know that in that practice, space is very important. So our harmony and connection, like positioning the flower and in a way. Also Thich Nhat Hanh used to talk about when arranging flowers to make space, right? So he also valued that. So which came first for you? Because I'm thinking in Ikebana, space is important, and harmony and connection, which also run through music and poetry and the creative art. So which came first for you? And as in Ikebana, which one is your centerpiece? You know how we start with one particular piece, I forget the name, but it's like the centering piece, and then everything gets organized around that. So is my question clear? I know I think I went all over the place there, but
I'll start answering and let me know if I'm on the mark. But you're talking about space and form.
And harmony and connection. Like there is this connection between the longer piece and then the other pieces that need to be spaced out. And so
this sense of really heaven, earth, and humanity to this practice, and form that foundation for the piece, that you're working with. And because this is a contemplative practice, before we begin, we still the body, right? We still the mind. It's contemplative, and so every arrangement is actually coming out of being expressed through my own experience as well. So it's interesting to notice. I've had a teacher who she can tell how I'm feeling by my arrangements. Oh, you're longing. How did you know? And like the flower is doing, it's longing. Or you're agitated, and there's so much constriction in the piece. There's not much space, and so I feel that space and form are existing at the same time, and it's really hard to separate them. And so when being in that sense of or in that practice of contemplative arts, really, whether it's Ikebana or poetry or something like that, I think that practice of opening up into our spaciousness, and not letting the mind be empty, but letting the mind settle, right? We're not emptying the mind, right? But just
Right.
settling, and then feeling into what needs to come through and being patient with that. Um, and then being in play or in a dance with that energy, that sense of form, that sense of language, that motivation to pick up this flower and smell it and look at it and understand how it was, why is it bending this way, or this piece of this plant or this branch, why is it bending this way? And instead of putting onto it what I feel it needs to do, connecting with, is this a representation of how I'm feeling right now? So then it's just this flow, this continuation, this relational conversation
Yes,
with
exactly.
nature, and then placing it into the arrangement. So it's very much a conversation and a relationship, and it's sweet, I have found, to just kind of take my time with it. I also admire more advanced practitioners who can be very quick with it, but as a forever student of it, of Ikebana specifically, to kind of, let that relationship emerge with the material, with the plant material, um, and connect with all the elements that come through, and to not be in this place of extraction, which I think is easy to do, if which I do as well. If I'm like, oh, I just want flowers in the house, but I just, I just want something pretty, so I'm going to put some flowers in a vase, and that's great, and that's fine, but I'll relate to them. That feels different to me than, let me bring in these, plant spirits into my home and create poetry together. And then the plant material, the flowers, the branches, the leaves, the grasses, they're speaking to each other also. So it's a conversation with space and form, and just, and play, I think, is really important there also. I think we could be so serious in our practice. Sometimes I find myself just like, and my teacher will ring the bell. Oh, wow. I was really tense. Yeah.
Yeah. For some of my practices, because I'm doing some trainings, I have to videotape, and I laugh because I take it so seriously, and it's like, it's not that serious, seriously.
Yeah, we're playing with flowers,
We're
right?
just playing, right? So so that's what I'm saying. When I remember the first time that I thought about it as a metaphor for life was when I heard Thich Nhat Hanh talking about that, and not so much referring to Ikebana, but referring to the flower arrangement, and how our relationships with people and with ourselves should be like that. Like, the flowers need space, so don't bunch, all of them, and just put two or three, and let them have their beauty expressed. So it is, I guess my question, going back though to part of my question though for you, is which one of all the practices, the arts that you practice, which one feels for you, if you have one, that feels like, yes, this is my centerpiece. This is the one, this is the longest one that kind of determines the whole structure of the piece. Do you have one? Have you thought of which one is?
It's changed for me, and it changes by the season of my life and what I need. And I would say right now, my main practice is actually yoga nidra,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's a state of consciousness, a state of awareness,
Right.
and then there's also a technique,
Mm-hmm.
for bringing yourself into that. It has very much meditative
Mm-hmm.
qualities to it,
Mm-hmm.
restful qualities, energetic qualities, creative qualities. Um, it can do so much, and as you mentioned before, I'm in graduate school now. I have a lot of life changes and things happening, and to be in a restful place, to really place my body in a restful position. I'm not sitting up most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm laying down,
Mm-hmm.
and for this practice, and guiding myself or listening to guidance and exploring that. It's been helpful for me for, I think it's been the center of my practice for a little over a year now.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely when
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
started, I really started to dive into it more. Um, and what happens for me is sometimes I fall asleep, and that's like, oh, that's what my body needed.
Mm-hmm.
And other times I will arise and I'll know exactly what I need to do next. But I needed to take that rest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, Yoga Nidra has been,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's interesting because for me, and I'm a practitioner, but I'm not trained to teach others. That has not been the route I have taken. But both yoga nidra and kundalini are two practices that I have used to for my writing, for kind of generating and putting my, especially when I'm stuck in one project. Either one of them is like a vehicle to unleash whatever it is that I have to unleash. Is that your experience as well in terms of moving the creative process?
It can be. Yeah, it can be. I think this sense of grounding in some
Mm-hmm.
way, first grounding and then allowing something to move through.
Mm-hmm.
I think yoga nidra, and to some extent, vigorous pranayama or kundalini that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's an allowing of things to move through.
Mm-hmm.
And
In very different ways,
yes,
but yeah.
yes. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that sense of grounding first
Mm-hmm.
creates, I feel for me, I don't want to say a safer container,
Mm-hmm.
but it creates an environment where I don't kind of go off too much, because things get dislodged, and
Mm-hmm.
memories start to move, um, and I might need to kind of harness that so that I can get up and continue to live my life, or get up and drive a car or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. But it's also important to let those things move through. So I appreciate the different ways that the different way for me that yoga nidra does that, where
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm just creating, it's like a river, I'm like
Mm-hmm.
maybe moving a boulder so
Yeah,
that the river can continue to pass through a little bit more, you know.
exactly.
And then bringing in the pranayama and the kundalini
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
practices, um, either like before or after or something like that, to kind of help move things through a little bit. But yeah, there can be so much stagnation, I
Mm-hmm.
think, that happens. And I live, you're in the Northeast and I'm in Colorado, so we're
Yeah.
coming spring now, which is wonderful, but then winter can be a little stagnating, so I need a little bit of heat, right? I need something
Yes.
to kind of move things through. And that is very helpful in the creative process, I found, to bring myself back into the body as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to ground yourself. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you want our listeners to know, or how do you want to close this? It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to connect about these topics, and um yeah, I there isn't anything in particular. I feel that um it's wonderful to be in conversation with you, and I appreciate your podcast because this is we're all creating this world
Mhm.
together, and it's important for us to recognize how we're showing up and what's coming up in our own bodies, and then to be in conversation with each other like this, around what's coming up for each other, and then to notice that, okay, I'm not the only one thinking about this is great. And to be in
Mhm.
the art of living, um,
Yeah.
which I'm appreciating more of. That this is, I come from kind of a very kind of strict upbringing where it's like this is right and this is wrong
Mm.
and this is the right way to do things, and it's been really it's been part of my healing,
Mm.
to let go of that, to dismantle that, and to bring in more play, and to recognize that this is a very artistic life that we're living, whether people consider themselves creative or not. But you are, right?
We
Because you're
are.
alive, and
Yes.
you're always creating something. So it's maybe something I'm leaving for myself, but then also others, maybe if it resonates, to just to continue to play, and and be the brushstroke, and be the hand, and be the flower, that we get to play with nature, with phenomena. There's
Yeah.
there's no power over in that sense. I think with nature, that it's really a play of discovery and relationship, and um, and humor even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a good way to bring this to a close, and also to invoke the spirit of Tignaham with this idea of interbeing, right? So you just, the way that you just describe it, that we are all always interbeing and creating. So thank you so much. And thank you, listeners. Thank you for listening to What a Word is Worth. You can access today's interview at Anchor, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you are interested, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. And also, if you find this program beneficial, leave us a review. And I am with you in love and compassion always, always.